kōrero ngā mea e pana ki te whenua me te mōna o tēnei rohe o ngā tika hunu. Hai tēnei wā, ka huri o mātou whakaaro ki te whānau pane o rena tā hāpatu. I mua tōna moe ngātu te ahi nei. Ko te tumanako na ngākau ka tai te tumanako kia rātau o tōna mahi huhua i ngā rā i mua. Nō reira e pā mana ki tia i a mātou e mahi ana ki rongi tēnei komiti. O mai te kaha ki tō mātou tia mana a toro me tōna ho a Rex ki e whakaarahi a mātou ki runga I te arahi pai. Nō reira e pā mana ki tia a mātou ake. Amene.
Amene. Kia ora.
Kia ora te minita. Okay. Welcome everyone. Can I ask for apologies, please? We do have some from Paul Bailey, Debbie Hewitt, Peter Paku, and Joinella Rick Parker as well. Any others? Someone move the apologies be accepted, please.
I'll move one, just note that who's got corona.
No. Nikki and yeah. Okay, all in favour? Thank you. Any conflicts of interest declarations? Any new ones? Please see our secretary if you forget anything. Declare. Confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of May.
Just a question of clarification, Chair. Do we have a quorum?
No, we don't.
So we can't confirm the minutes, I would have thought.
That's true. No, we can only discuss matters today. There'll be no decisions made.
But we can't do the minutes, though. You can't confirm the minutes. That's correct.
Discuss them after.
We can discuss them. You just can't confirm. Just take it to the next committee meeting.
So, any issues on page 1 that you want to raise? Page 2, page 3, page 4. Okay. Those to the side. Follow-ups from previous regional planning committee meeting. Can James, can you talk to those if there's anything?
Look, we'll take them as read, Chair, but happy to answer any questions in relation to those.
Okay. So we have some decision items which we can discuss. If we get through these early enough, we'll be able to pull in the MFE group a lot earlier. Some other discussions.
And in particular?
So, Jenny, I was just referring to the first item, which the Chair asked for comment on, page 6 and 7. There's therefore also the follow-up letter to the Minister for the Environment, as resolved by the last meeting of the committee, to write to the Minister and express concerns about the viability of an outstanding freshwater body plan change in relation to cultural values. So that's recorded in there.
Have we had a response on that?
I don't believe so, no we haven't. It might be something that could be put to the MFE officials today to see whether or not there has been any discussion with the Minister on that point. And then in the information pack there's also the latest correspondence in relation to the Water Conservation Order and some of the tank newsletters, recent tank newsletters for the committee's information to bring everyone up to speed about where the tank group is getting to. And I guess we could have a discussion or answer any questions in relation to either of those two matters if the committee has any questions.
Mr. Chairman, a question or a comment on pages 16 and 17. There's an appendix to the Water Conservation Order report that seems to be an extensive list of meetings that have been held between, I assume, staff and various interest groups. And if I go down the list, I won't bore you by reading it, but dairy farmers, farmer reference group, beef and lamb, grower briefing, Twyford irrigators, farmer reference group. You see a pattern here? There's not a single environmental organization that seems to have been at any kind of special treatment, special briefing. A lot of traffic of people coming through here seem to have a lot to say about where tank is headed. Beef and lamb, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just wondering what exactly does this purport to be, and what does one need to do to get on the list?
I'll ask Tom to answer that one.
Yeah, so as you point out, Councillor, the list was provided just to show the formal activity. I can attest to quite a high level of engagement, probably direct between, probably in particular, Mary Ann Baker with the likes of Forest and Bird and Fish and Game, who are just responding directly to questions on the development of the plan change. The NGOs are present at some of those reference group meetings, so I'm not concerned that there's any sense of preference or exclusivity around access to staff or interest from staff in relation to the development of the plan.
Through you, Chair, it might also be helpful if Mr. Skirman just also explained some of what the acronyms are, the WAG, the EAWG, the MWWG, etc., as they're not explained in the document, but as I understand it, do include groups that include the environmental NGOs.
Yeah, that's correct. We've got the Economic Assessment Working Group, we've got the Water Augmentation Group, as two examples.
MW is what, Mana Whenua Working Group?
Mm. Okay. And in particular, in respect of the Mana Whenua Working Group, Council has provided some resource for them to engage a consultant, Maury Black, to work through the plan. And again, the engagement between our staff and Maury Black has, over the last months, has been, in my view, quite extensive.
Question. I'm asking because I've got interest in the water.
Excuse me, Chair, sorry, if you take your hand off that.
Okay, thank you. So there's the Water Augmentation Group, and we also have, I'll just put notice here, I was waiting for GB, but we've got a recommendation from the Tangata Whenua regarding tank that we'd like to put here too. So are there terms of reference, is my question, to these groups in alignment with the tank kaupapa?
So look, I'm going to have to check that. I can't recall if there are formal terms of reference for each of the working groups.
I don't know whether Tom recall. I think when they were established, there was certainly a statement. Yes, I'm getting nods from the back of the room. So yes, there was a terms of reference or a statement of purpose that was agreed by the TANK group for each of those working groups.
It would be good to get a copy of the state of purpose, because it's got the WAG here, and it's particularly been highlighted in the Central Hawke's Bay area this month. I asked questions about it the month before. I don't know what the cope-up is about, the augmentation group. So the name can mean a lot of different things.
Okay, any other matters arise in the applicant's report?
Just Chair, if you could indulge me, what's the process from here? Where some of us are able to have a discussion about these matters for the day, no decisions, I get that. But does this whole agenda then come back to this committee so we can make decisions and therefore we go through it all again? Or are we going to take it as read next time, and those that aren't here and don't get an opportunity to ask questions about the oil and gas plan change before the decision, will we regurgitate the whole meeting is what I'm asking? Because if that's the case, I'm wondering what the value is in it.
Can I ask a question?
Yep, sure. We'll just try and find your
Hang
face.
on a minute, one question at a time, please.
Sorry.
We'll answer the first one.
So, Chair, can I suggest that with respect to the pro forma items such as the minutes, the follow-ups, etc., what we'll do is we'll combine this meeting and the next meeting together so that they can be done in one fell swoop at the next meeting. With respect to the substantive items, look, they will need formal decisions in due course. Can I suggest that what we try to do today is deal with as many of the questions and concerns as possible so that with the next agenda, which will be a doubly large agenda now, that we limit the discussion at the next meeting, hopefully because we would have resolved most of the issues today and can expedite those papers reasonably quickly. I take your point, Councillor, and I guess it's one of the reasons why at a staff level we're particularly concerned about the quorum level for this committee, and it sits alongside, of course, the decision threshold, both of which are very, very high and are posing an ongoing challenge in terms of convening a committee of this size and getting decisions through this committee in an expeditious fashion.
Just, Mr. Chair.
Just to follow that up, just to follow that up, though, Chair, I get all that, but because of the rules are what they are, and people are here or not here for reasons of tangi or reading in Parliament, etc. And I think in a modern world we've just got to accept that. Those people have an absolute right to ask all their questions again because they're not here and there's not a quorum here. That's the point I'm making. I mean, we're going to have a great discussion today and we're probably going to resolve some of the issues, but actually we're going to have to turn around and do it all again, whether we want to constrict them or not, because the rules are the rules, the quorum's the quorum. We don't have one.
Look, absolutely, Councillor, and I made a decision this morning to proceed with the meeting when we were advised of the one person that we were expecting today that was going to give us a quorum to proceed anyway, and it was on the basis that at the time we were advised many of you had already commenced your travel to this meeting, and we felt that given that and given the appearance by ministry officials today that it was in our best interest just to box on.
Just, Mr. Chairman.
I've got a question over here.
For me?
Yep.
Yep.
Right, so I just want to clarify the quorum. How many people do we have here today, excluding myself?
11.
11. Because in terms of the quorum, I think we really need to clarify the standing orders. I've had a bit of an email exchange with Leanne this morning. Because my understanding is we don't have currently standing orders, but I'm now being told that the council standing orders apply. Whereas previously we've had this discussion, the RPC provides that we set out our own standing orders, and that specifically under the Act, it excludes the application of the Local Government Act in relation to standing orders. So I would have thought if we had 14, whether we're here in person or myself, as I've joined many times before by teleconference, that we would be able to get a quorum if we had 14 in total.
13
but I'm now
now.
being told that actually I'm not included in the quorum because I'm not present, and when that's been raised before, my understanding is that I am part of the quorum, even though I'm here by teleconference. So it would be really good to have someone clarify those rules so that we know where we stand.
We're 13 with Tanya.
With Tanya, 12 in the room, 13 with Tanya.
But you know, Tanya's in the room as far as I'm concerned.
Does that include Mr Mohi?
No.
So Mr Mohi is
We could
not.
add him in, that would give us 14.
No, you
Oh,
can't.
can't we?
How about we double count you?
Thank you.
Even better.
I'll just leave.
So look, when this committee was first established, there was consideration at that time around standing orders, and my understanding was that the standing orders of the day were adopted by the committee with a view to potentially some bespoke standing orders being developed in time. At that time, the council standing orders did not provide for attendance by video conference. Subsequently, this council standing orders have been updated to enable participation by video conference, and staff are taking the view that the updated standing orders of council therefore now apply to this committee, notwithstanding the fact there hasn't been a resolution by this committee to adopt, on the basis that this is a committee of council and those standing orders do apply in their own articulation to all committees of council. The issue that seems to be a little unclear here is that the Local Government Act itself, regardless of what is said in our standing orders, explicitly precludes video conference attendance for the calculation of a quorum. So while Tanya can vote and participate as a member of the committee for all intents and purposes, other than calculation of a quorum, the Act overrides in this example. But Tanya, you're raising a view that the RPC Act 2015 has an override clause of those provisions of the Local Government Act, and that's something which our Principal Governance Advisor is shaking her head in her understanding.
Sorry, if you go to section 14 of our RPC Act, subsection 3, paragraph E, it says that the following provisions of Schedule 7 of the Local Government Act do not apply to the RPC, and clause 27 is the one that relates to standing orders. So I don't think we're going to resolve this today, but I would really like someone to come up with a paper trail, because I don't understand how, I don't recall us ever adopting standing orders, and I've raised this before. That's something to be done. But for the moment, we actually need some clarity about what the rules are. And so I'm trying to understand how you get to, we are supposed to be following the council standing orders when I'm looking at a reference in our Act which says the Local Government Act doesn't apply, and there's also other provisions in there which say we will set our own standing orders. But the whole point of this is to get to, do we have a quorum today? And my understanding is even if we count me, we still don't have a quorum.
Can I just add something here, Chair? I do recall us having a debate about the standing orders applying to this committee, and we did pass a resolution to say that council, in the absence of a set of standing orders for the RPC, the council's standing orders would apply. And there was some discussion about that, but that's what we decided. And the second thing is, it's a very tough thing to say that the Local Government Act does not apply when the RPC doesn't have standing orders in its place. I would have thought if the RPC, if we take the notion that's been put forward, the RPC doesn't have any standing orders, well, where does that leave us? It means we can make them up on the day. And if we then, which we can't. So, of course we can't. But in the absence of a specific provision, you then have to look around for what is in the relevant legislation. And the specific provision, the relevant legislation, is that you have to be present to be counted for a quorum. And the next thing we have to come to, do we as a council think that's correct? And I personally do. I just personally think if you're going to have a count for a meeting, then there has to be a quorum, which has to be of people present. And sure, other people can patch them. So I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't think we're doing it wrong. At the end of it is, we simply don't have a quorum. So it's an artificial argument.
Okay. Roy, you had a question.
Well, it wasn't a question, just when you suggested that the ministry might be required early, do you want me just to alert Joyce Ann? She's having breakfast with them to make sure they're back here if indeed it's going to be early?
It's all right. Well, we will deal with it. Yeah, thank you.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Look, Chair, if I may, just following on from that last discussion, I do think it would be helpful if staff brought forward a paper to the next meeting of the committee to definitively lay out these matters. And if there are things that need further resolution, then we can set work and train on that. But I agree that this matter has been recurring, and so we do need to put it to bed once and for all.
Just on the matter Councillor Barker raised, I do recall the discussion as well.
Yeah.
And we did say that we would, until we had formed our own, we would adopt the existing standing orders. However, I think that in section 10 it says 10.4 it says the RPC has the powers reasonably necessary to carry out its functions in a manner consistent with the specified legislation. And I think we need to get away from this formalism stuff and get into the practicalities of what we're meant to be doing here sometimes. You know, we can get trapped in all this. Everyone's different interpretation of what a word means, and it holds us up. So, yeah, it would be good to see that this document develops so we can operate in a practical manner. And I know we may even have to reconsider this quorum idea again as well, the threshold. Okay. So, any other matters from the standing, from the follow-ups? There was a requirement by myself, our Deputy Chair of the Māori section of the RPC, the Chair, the other Co-Chair, and Councillor Barker to discuss the terms of reference. And in the main, well, from our end of it, we agreed, it's in this paper here, as a follow-up item, we did agree that in the main, the terms of reference we were happy with, apart from adding the purpose of the RPC, which seemed to be missing. So that's something that not too sure whether the chair, other co-chair, look at that.
Terms of reference?
Yeah.
We were going to have a discussion on that this afternoon, weren't we? But I think we might have some time later on in the morning.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
We've noted that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yes.
I guess my question would be, why not suspend this meeting and have the workshop?
That would be a good idea. I'd like that.
Be a more useful use of the time, it seems to me, than having a duplicative discussion of the
Do I have a
of the
second
Zoom.
to that motion? Is it a motion?
Can't pass it.
We can just agree to it.
We just agreed.
I support it.
Chair, look,
Rick, it's just been proposed that we suspend the decision items on the meeting and go straight to the workshop item, which is relevant on everyone's mind.
Okay.
Chairs, just before we go there, the one thing that would be helpful for staff is to know whether or not there were any further information requests or additional pieces of work that any committee member was seeking to get in relation to either of the substantive agenda items, because if there is more work to do, we'd rather know about it now because we can prepare for the next meeting. So if anybody had anything particularly they wanted done, that would be good to know now.
I'll just put forward that at our tangata whenua hui yesterday, we agreed to a recommendation to request for Tank, this is for Tank, a report from the mana whenua working group on the tank and a report from Ngāti Kāngani iwi.
Okay.
If we could have that, that would be great.
Thank you.
So just for clarification, the nature of the report, can you provide me with some further guidance in terms of what the details of that report is? It seems to be quite a wide scope.
Okay, well...
I mean, I'm happy to do it offline, but...
Yep, okay, we'll do it offline.
I have a query. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you, Tani, but we can't see you. Is your camera working?
My camera's on, but I don't think yours is.
Okay, we've got someone coming from downstairs to check it. Anyway, yep.
It's okay. Just following on from Jenny's request on behalf of the tangata whenua reps, the other one was we know that Joella has prepared a table tracking through some of the cultural values or, I guess, aspirations from the tangata whenua document through into the tank plan change, but mindful that because the tank plan hasn't been drafted in full, we can't see how those track through fully. So James, we'd be looking for an updated report from Joella to show how those cultural values have tracked through and are reflected in the operative provisions of the plan.
That's fine, we'll bring that forward.
Thank you.
Okay, so we go back to Councillor Belford's suggestion. Everyone in agreement over that we move into a workshop?
Still
All in favour?
public.
Bye.
We are, but don't shut the meeting. We'll switch off.
Anyone objecting?
I think we should, for the public's notification, we don't have a quorum today, and therefore we are unable to manage the decision items which are listed in the agenda. So the thought is that we would suspend the meeting, and I notice Walter's just come in, so you need to. So while we don't have a quorum, so we can't discuss those items today. We can't make decisions on them. And as Councillor Wilson has rightly pointed out, we could talk around them and have a little chit-chat, but it would take up a lot of time because the same chit-chat would be rightly held by the people who come to the next meeting. So we'll just be walking through the same pathway twice.
Mr. Chairman, do you still intend to have the presentation?
Yes.
Ministry of the Environment
Have to do that.
at 11 o'clock.
We'll get them in as soon as we can, probably.
So, I mean, that is something that perhaps some members of the public may be interested in. And if that's the case, it would be unfair to exclude them.
Where are they at?
Well, according to Gavin, they'll be down for a cup of tea at 10:15.
They can be here at 10:15 for a tea break and 10:30 presentation, but if you want to keep it at 11 o'clock presentation start time, to enable you to do your workshop between now and then, either option 60. They just have afternoon flights.
What's the committee's preference?
Well, we still have 3/4 of an hour
Yeah.
for discussion anyway.
Well, when you have the ministry presentation, will you reconvene an open part of the meeting?
Yes.
So members of the public, if they wish to return for that, would be able to do so
Yes.
at 10:30.
So given that the members of the public are already here, it may pay to get them down here sooner.
Well, that would be the best way.
Yeah.
Sounds like they physically can't get here till 10:15.
Okay.
So look, I think we need to box on. I mean, look at no problem with video streaming and having members of the public here for that discussion. I just note that it's not a meeting that we can convene, if you like, because there's no quorum to convene a meeting. So it's an informal
But
meeting.
as well as that, if you're going to have a workshop, why does it have to be public excluded? I don't see any great sensitivity there.
There's no formal reason why. Over to the members of the committee if they're happy to have the public present.
Well, as Alan well knows, very often at a workshop is an opportunity for people to have a free and frank conversation.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that this council, not necessarily this committee, does far too much in closed-door workshop sessions. What we're supposed to be doing.
I suspect we won't have the conversation that the council needs to have in relation to the terms of reference and the review of the RPC, and if it is in public session.
That's what Councillor Dick wants. Yeah, I vote we just stay with the plan, pull up stakes now, reconvene at 10:15 for the thing.
Just adding to that discussion, I don't believe it should be publicly open because it's also about fostering and nurturing the treaty partnership, and that's got to start with the RPC inclusive. There's plenty of time for the public to comment and have input in that. And I'd say that the mana whenua groups aren't here to actually participate in it publicly as well. So I agree with Councillor Barker.
I think, Chair, the only way, given the objection to it being closed, I think we should just up stakes until 10:15, have smoko, and then reconvene there. It's the only pathway we've got forward.
Sounds like a great idea.
I'm not going to be a dog in the manger.
Well, you've done it.
If my view is a sole view and not supported, then I'll defer.
No, you've done it.
What?
You've done it.
Done what?
You've done it. Can.
I don't know what you're talking
I
about.
know exactly what I'm talking about.
No, I don't.
Okay, let's please keep the sideline discussions out of this. Okay, so can I hand over to our, in terms of facilitating our...
So you would like to now go into workshop till 10:15 or 10:30?
No, I think Rick's idea is.
Oh, we were going to do that, but it's now having debate whether it should be open or closed, up and closed. Just the ice has got off the air. Let's just up stakes until 10:15, reconvene with the MFEs here.
Okay, I'm going to do it the
Well, I don't intend to sit around here till 10:15 for that. I'm going to go home. I mean, if we're not going to have a useful conversation about something for the next hour and a half, or the course of the morning, I have better things to do.
I'm with your camp, Tom.
Well, I think we should proceed, hand over to our Chief Executive Officer.
This is a wonderful display of intelligent governance.
If we're now going to have a workshop on the terms of reference and the review of the RPC, then we'll need to clear the room. The view of the committee was to do that in public excluded, so...
Our MFE people have just turned up in reception.
Saved by the bell.
Well, Chair, can I suggest that we invite MFE in to come and give their presentation, and we get that underway before the morning tea break?
Yep, that's very
Guys have a plan.
Rescued by the ministry.
How unusual. So, if perhaps we just take a comfort stop for 5 minutes to allow them to get set up.
Okay, that was an interesting.
Transparent.
Our MFE guests, Robert McLean, Claire Gregory, Claire Gibb, and Dan Shenton. Thank you very much for coming and doing a presentation to us today. So it's all in your hands.
He mihi nui, he mihi mahare kia koutou katoa. Thank you for having us here today at this committee meeting. We're really happy to be here. So my name is Robert McLean. I'm the RMA practice manager for the Ministry for the Environment. I do have a bit of a love for Hawke's Bay, and I was involved in the Mohaka ki Ahuriri Waitangi, when the Waitangi Tribunal was doing the research up in Mohaka, the Kupa Whānau claim, and I remember, some of my limited knowledge of the issues come from that experience some years ago now, but I guess this committee came out of that inquiry and needing to do things better and together. So with me today, so Claire Gibb on my right here, she's going to talk about the new mana whakahono provisions in the RMA that were introduced last year in 2017 about, now in the RMA there's if you like, a relationship structure between iwi and councils to really promote this partnership that we're working towards. So, and then we've got Dan Shenton here, who's going to talk about the upcoming iwi Environmental Forum in the Hawke's Bay next month, as one way MFE and other Crown agencies can fulfil their treaty settlement obligations. And then Claire Gregory, over on the left here, who's actually from the Hawke's Bay, planner and relationship manager with the Hawke's Bay Regional Council, is going to give a general update. That's right, yeah. So I don't know how long we've got actually, but as long as we want. And we're very much welcome to answer any questions you might have. Not that we might be able to answer them, but anyway, we can give them a shot. Anyway, so I'll leave it over to you, Claire.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. No tamaki makaurau au, he manatū mō te tai ao e mahi ana, ko Claire Gibb taka ingoa. So thank you. Obviously I've been introduced twice now, but Claire, I'm from the Ministry for the Environment, and I've been working on the mana whakahono policy for the last 2.5 years, so worked through the policy development and also now developing the guidance which we released in April this year. So this is available on our website, and quite a lot of what I'll be talking about today is in this document. I came in November and met with tangata whenua in the Hawke's Bay and also around the country, and also with councils at that time to help develop the guidance. So it's very much based in the conversations around the country, and it's hopefully very useful as a result. And just acknowledge a couple of people in the room that were at that hui in November. So, mana whakahono, imagine most of you have heard of it, but it's a relationship agreement mechanism that's in the RMA. It was introduced in April last year between tangata whenua or iwi authorities and local authorities, so councils. I've got my screen down there. So they're not prescriptive. They encompass all of the existing provisions in the RMA, and it's really up to the participating authorities, so the iwi authority and council, to discuss how they want to implement and work together under the RMA. There are principles for the arrangement. These are derived from a lot of treaty settlement principles, so they talk about collaboration, cooperation, working efficiently and effectively to achieve outcomes. They are really about recognising the benefits of working together. So we're seeing quite a few examples around the country where tangata whenua and councils are coming together and pooling resources or really having focused objectives and creating efficiencies and better outcomes for the whole community. They're also an opportunity to address the mismatch in expectations between iwi and council. So we hear a lot about tangata whenua not responding to resource consent queries from the council. So why is that? Why aren't tangata whenua responding? Is that actually a reality? What can council be doing to address that situation? Can they be doing some of the assessment of the resource consent? Can they be summarising the resource consent so that when it goes to the iwi authority it's a much smoother process for them to actually engage in? Please don't go to sleep. So those mismatch in expectations are often what causes some of the rub in the relationships, in my understanding, and so this is an opportunity to have a robust conversation about how to work together better. The RMA prescribes contents of the arrangement. These are broad matters, so I've got up there the must things. So the must things are what you must talk about. You don't have to have an operational level of engagement on all of those matters, but in your arrangement you need to note that you've talked about them and whatever agreement you've come to. So that covers policy statement and plan making, consultation, monitoring, treaty settlements, conflicts of interest, and resolving disputes during the operation of the arrangement. So just going back to treaty settlements, it's really a discussion about how does the mana whakahono fit with whatever mechanisms have come through the treaty settlement. So this isn't about duplicating processes, it's making sure that all of the different ways you're working together are really aligned. And also, if there's something that's been set up through a settlement and that's not functioning well and it's not achieving the objectives, whilst you can't relitigate what's in the settlement because that's fixed into law, there's an opportunity to talk about how you might work together better to achieve the outcomes of the settlement. Under the MAY, there's resource consenting, limited notification, which falls under consenting, other duties, functions or powers. So this covers all of the other sections in the Act, including Section 33, transfers of power and joint management arrangements. So it's really an opportunity to talk about anything else, just covering everything in the RMA. For these arrangements, you can have multiple iwi authorities or multiple local authorities. So there's no prescription as to who's, how many parties are involved. If you choose to have, or if the iwi authorities choose to collectively initiate and enter into the mana whakahono, they can include in the mana whakahono how they're going to work together. So it may be that the iwi authorities and council decide to meet once a quarter, and the iwi authorities collectively want to meet a week before that to discuss some of the issues and gain some alignment before they meet with council, and so that could actually be laid out in the mana whakahono itself. There's also an opportunity for delegation. So we recognise that iwi authority is not the best representation for a lot of issues. So within the arrangement, and I understand also that delegation isn't necessarily an appropriate word. It doesn't recognise the mana of hapu or marae, but it's a legal terminology. So the mana whakahono could lay out how the hapu, marae, other people are involved with the mana whakahono if council should engage directly with those groups or people on certain matters. So if there was a particular puna or awa that was associated with a hapu, the iwi authority or the mana whakahono could say that council should deal just with that hapu on issues relating to that awa.
What if they don't want to?
Who doesn't want to?
What if the iwi authority doesn't want to give authority to mana whenua?
So the primary conversation is with the iwi authority, and if these arrangements aren't seeking to undermine those associations and relationships, and if you as council are working with the hapu already and you've got MOUs or ways of working, then this is seeking to for you to continue that conversation with the hapu. So an iwi authority can initiate with council, but council has the opportunity to initiate with hapu if they see that that is the appropriate relationship.
In the RMA, there's a section 3 or something about engaging with Māori. So that's where I would have thought hapu marae, as opposed to, it doesn't say an iwi authority, it actually says Māori. So are we redefining what that means?
Thank you.
What's the definition of iwi authority? That's the simplest way to that.
Yeah. So,
in regards to the RMA.
So the RMA does, you're right, it uses Māori, the relationship of Māori with their taonga, so that's section 6. However, with the way the RMA was set up, originally going back to 1991, the idea at the time, and you might remember the Runanga Iwi Act at the time, which I think Winston Peters repealed, if I recall, but the idea was that the iwi authorities would be set up as the kind of, if you like, the door into the Māori world. I mean that was the idea at the time. Of course, it didn't quite fit reality, but that was the idea, and I guess the RMA has still got that. So that's why the RMA, while it uses the term Māori, providing for the Māori relationship, but the operational way in, if you like, into the Māori world is through the iwi authorities, for good or bad. And to be honest, we probably need to relook at that in the legislation, but that's what we...
So that's practice. It's practice. It's not a policy. It's practice.
No, it's in the act.
Policy.
Yeah. So I'm
just looking at ways for settlement is a rebirth of hapu.
Yeah.
Iwi is a colonial pathway. So under the Act with Māori, I would think that in the reference to Māori, that marae and hapu have some leverage to be heard, whether they agree with the iwi authority or not. So that's what I'm saying. It lends their voice to them.
Yeah.
And I think...
and the question I had, what is the definition of an iwi authority?
Yeah.
So an iwi authority is an authority that represents tangata whenua, and the tangata whenua definition links back to mana whenua. So I think this is an opportunity to have a conversation around what is the appropriate level of representation in the region, and the suggestions that I've got here in terms of preparing for a mana whakahono very much feed into that. So we're recommending that staff undertake a SWOT analysis, so a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Part of that will be a stock take of everything that you've got happening in the region already in terms of relationships and commitments. So what are your existing MOUs? What are your informal relationships that you actually rely on quite heavily? Understanding what the landscape is, and that will provide some clarity as to who you should be engaging with. including whether it's appropriate for council to engage with hapu or iwi authorities.
But with respect, you haven't answered the question about what is the definition of an iwi authority.
So it is a fairly broad definition, which is the authority that represents tangata whenua.
That's what's in the Act, yeah.
The second question I have is who is able to initiate mana whakahono? Does it rest with council or iwi?
An iwi authority can initiate with you, and you can initiate with an iwi authority or a hapu. When council initiates, the process from there is fairly open, but when an iwi authority, in terms of the timeframes, when an iwi authority initiates with council, there is a statutory process which includes council organising a hui within 60 working days to meet and talk about how you're going to work through the negotiations. And there's an 18-month time frame within which you need to conclude the arrangement unless you come to a collective agreement of a different time frame.
Thank you.
In regards to Kahangunu, the Kahangunu Rohe in Hawke's Bay region, there are 6 settlement groups. Are they defined as a iwi authority?
7.
7, sorry. Oh, Mike, 7. I'm just trying to figure it out because these are the dynamics.
Yep. So I don't have the information on the background of all of that here, and I think it's important to collectively as council look at what the information that is available and look at the definition and think about who works together and who doesn't and how this is actually going to function within the region. So part of the mana whakahono is actually to provide flexibility to enable council and tangata whenua to work together in the best way possible, recognising that there are sections in the Act which council may or may not be fulfilling at the moment. So the intent of mana whakahono is to address the mismatch between what's provided for elsewhere in the Act in terms of engagement, participation and decision making, and the reality on the ground. So that's the reason that mana whakahono is able to be initiated by iwi authorities, is to provide that compulsion to council to come to the table. Because historically we've had a lot of feedback that tangata whenua have approached councils seeking engagement and haven't achieved any traction.
Or been excluded altogether.
So that's the part of the origin of this policy.
Yeah, so they're good questions actually, and very similar questions, around the country that we've had as we've gone around. Like a couple of weeks ago, we were in Taranaki with the iwi Environmental Forum there, which had both the 8 iwi and the councils together, and representatives of, and yeah, in Taranaki, definitely the post-settlement, organisations are the iwi authority, for the purposes of the RMA, so it's kind of clear. But in other areas, if you've got post-settlement or units set up for, I don't know, business enterprises or whatever, it kind of depends on the nature of the entity. Yeah, I don't know if that answers it.
So just, I'm just trying to get my understanding of what context you're operating from, and I suppose that should stem from the treaty obligations, and the treaty clearly stipulates hapu, not iwi. So my view of this would be that it is more convenient for the Crown to deal with a larger body. That's why they pulled in this word iwi. My memory of the iwi Act or whatever it was so that the government could disperse mana access funds, kuanga reo money and something else, mana business type thing. So they're one of these organisations which they call iwi groups. In terms of the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi in this region, the person who signed it was, the Declaration of Independence was first. The person who signed that was Te Hapuku, and he signed it on behalf of Whatu Apati. And then when people from this region signed the treaty, they didn't sign it as kaungunu, they signed it in terms of their hapu. So I can understand what is trying to be achieved here in terms of getting down to the nitty-gritty of issues. If a hapu over there has interest in a river, then really it's no business of the end. That's my point of view. Sometimes there are family issues. Just like with Europeans, they have a business and they've got their issues, I suppose. So I think we do have to have a mechanism whereby things can get specific. I'm not actually a fan of this terminology, mana whenua. I think it gives people this thing about the fact that there's like they are owners or something, or that you cannot be, in my view, in the Māori world, have mana whenua because you cannot have mana over your ancestor, which is Papa Tūnuku. So there needs to be some other words that actually talk about your role as a kaitiaki, because that's all we are in terms of the land, the kaitiaki of our particular rohe. Just as the Resource Management Act, from my mentor, Mr. Barker, who says that nobody in New Zealand owns land now because of the Resource Management Act. We are all kaitiaki. So I think we need to just have a quick look at how we frame things. Otherwise, we all get lost in misunderstanding. Thank you.
Kia ora. In just to say, so ideally you could have a mana whakaono, and it could be for a particular hapu, and maybe that hapu wants to develop, or a whānau wants to develop, say, papakainga on a particular block of land. So you could have it down at that level, or a hapu want to do some monitoring of the local river. But then you could also have it at a larger scale in terms of the iwi authority, looking at, like Claire was saying, about how consents are processed over a large area and how people are informed and connected to and so forth. So definitely the idea was that it would be available for all the different levels of like geographic entities, and I mean that's the hope, that how it can be developed.
So some of the other things that we're talking about or recommending that council staff undertake, and also that iwi authorities, hapu, undertake is a consideration of how these are going to be resourced. So part of the SWOT analysis will highlight the energy and resource that council's already putting into relationships, and an opportunity to consider how they might be streamlined, or how some relief might be taken off. The example that I used in terms of consenting, improving processes and using the resourcing more efficiently. And also opportunities through things like the long-term plan, as the mana whakahono is now in legislation and council is required to respond. Delegations are going to be really important, so considering who is actually going to receive an initiation within council and how it will be dealt with within council. So who's actually going to be at the negotiating table, who's going to be responsible for responding, and are you going to have people at the negotiating table that actually have the ability to make some commitments. So some feedback we've had from Tapuika and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council is that that's actually been really critical to establishing the relationship and undertaking the negotiations, is ensuring that the people around the table are actually able to move the conversation forward, and that they're not required to go back and seek agreement on every matter as they go through the process. We're also recommending that council undertake early conversations with tangata whenua. So obviously we've had some feedback today in terms of the hapu iwi authority engagement and relationship. Other conversations could be around what is the level of skill in the RMA space. So is there an opportunity for council to provide some upskilling on the RMA, on the LGA, some feedback on iwi environmental or hapu environmental management plans, so that there's some cross-pollination of understanding and upskilling before you reach the negotiating table. And I've covered off that last point already, which is in terms of the initiation obligations and timeframes. So the requirement to organise a hui within 60 working days, and then the 18-month timeframe for concluding. Once the mana whakahono is established, there's an obligation on council to update all of your policies and processes so that they are in alignment with the mana whakahono. So this isn't your district plan policies and processes, it's actually the internal operational policies and processes. So you may have made a commitment to ensure that resource consents are summarised and sent to the relevant iwi authority or hapu within a certain number of days. So you might need to update your internal policy about how you work with those resource consents to make sure that that's actually happening. Once council's committed to a mana whakahono, it can't be altered unless you agree with the other parties to the arrangement, and you can't terminate it unless there's that mutual agreement as well. So it does become a legally binding document.
Just and so that we don't get ourselves into some difficult space, I would say, because from, like, our tangata whenua understanding is one in terms of we look at the text of the treaty, and that's the basis on which we operate. So in the text of the treaty it says the Queen agrees to protect the chiefs, the sub-tribes and all the people of New Zealand in the unqualified exercise of their chieftainship over their lands, villages and their treasures. So in terms of these iwi authorities, they don't fit into this context. So I think maybe we need to review maybe how you are approaching it. And I know that legislation has created other entities which you have to now consider. But I'm just thinking, in terms of this iwi authority thing, there could be some hitches.
I guess that, going back to, again, 1991, when the RMA was set up, and you'll be aware of provisions in Section 6, 7 and 8, and Section 8 is about taking into account the principles of the treaty, but to be honest, in the RMA, it didn't really give any guidance on how a council is supposed to do that. So it's kind of like it was sitting on its own, if you like. And some of the more recent legislation provides a bit more guidance, and you might be aware of the Heritage New Zealand Poeri Tonga Act, which provides to recognise and provide for the principles of the treaty, but then it actually says how Heritage New Zealand is supposed to do that. So I guess the idea of mana whakahono was to actually, if you like, provide a bit more certainty or direction on how a council is to actually give effect or take into account the principles of the treaty in a way that's in partnership or working towards a partnership. I mean, that was the basic idea. So it doesn't really change the law itself in terms of the RMA, how it operates, except for once you've got a mana whakahono, that your planning processes need to be done in accordance with. And what I mean by planning processes, your regional plan, your regional policy statement, your regional coastal plan, your or district plans if you're a district council. So they need to be in accordance with the mana whakahono. But for your consenting processes and all that, the law's the same. It's just like what we've got to live with, right? But it's, I guess you try and package all this up in a mana whakahono in terms of practical processes and engagement that Claire's been talking about, resource consenting, monitoring and so forth.
Just supporting, I understand your kōrero, but the post-settlement reality is that whenua claims are managed by a whole new set of bodies, people. And there's been this age-old question for as long as I can remember of which Māori is the right Māori to talk to about the right thing. And I've always said talk to them all, and you cover your bases, so that needs to be included. So I suppose just supporting Toro's kōrero is that we need some assurities that the hapu, settled hapu, have the appropriate authority, because in this rohe in particular, the iwi authority does not have that jurisdiction over the whenua. In fact, they gave it to the hapu. So when talking to the right Māori about the right thing, especially with nearly all our settlement groups, notwithstanding ours tomorrow for the third and final reading, will be ready for business by the end of the year, if they're not already there. So it's just to make sure that the mana whakahono acknowledges that these are those right groups. But even with saying that the settlement groups are the right groups to discuss with the whenua, they would, I'm pretty sure, agree that they would never obstruct the opportunity for rangatiratanga of particular whānau whenua trusts, papakainga, which is with specific whānau. We have Māori land trusts. They would never obstruct and say, well, you come to us, because that's their rangatiratanga. So that's the era we're in post-settlement, is the rangatiratanga, and ensuring that mana whakahono facilitates that pathway.
Yeah.
Oh, kia ora. Kia ora. If I can just add to that with our colleagues here. So the iwi authority mandate, I did a lot of research into this because it is quite busy, it's complex. So we do have the document, and we have 38 iwi authority within this takiwā here. To that, we see the post-settlement leaders there. What we need to understand, or at least the research showed us, is it's actually Te Puni Kōkiri that manages it. It goes back to Te Kāhui Māngai. They are the designators of iwi authority. So it's not us as council, it's not the Ministry for the Environment. So at the end of the day, and I suppose we had a kōrero this morning, the concern is actually someone could submit. We could have Ngāti Joyce and Raihania submit for consideration. So what I may suggest through the co-chairs here is that I know my Māori colleagues, particularly in the Bay of Plenty and the Far North, have actually written to the Minister asking for that definition, as well as being clear about now we are in post-settlement times. What does this look like? What does rangatiratanga look like? What does the obligations? So I think what we've got here is the mana whakahono is another instrument for ensuring tangata whenua are at the table, are part of the process. However, the the context or the discourse, if you like, is the 38 iwi authority that we have in our takiwā here. And again, I can print this off and send it to you, but it was an interesting exercise when I went through with Te Puni Kōkiri. By the time you land how they do this, it's quite, it's not as easy. Perhaps the word I'm looking for is transparent, but it's not as easy as it should be. So that in essence is just to support our colleagues here, is that the iwi authority in itself is going to create those tensions as such. Kia ora.
Just in the Resource Management Act, it talks about affected parties, all right? So there's no reason why Māori should be treated any differently from anyone else. If something's happening to Auntie's watercress patch, that's who you need to talk to, you know? Not go up to look for an iwi authority that no one even knows who Auntie is. You know, if there's an activity that's going on that affects a family, a hapu or whatever, that's the obligation in the Resource Management Act. And I think, you know, it's good that we're actually talking about how we practically manage this thing and get rid of the formalism that sometimes makes things unpractical.
Totally agree.
Whereabouts is that watercress?
In the pot, boy, in the pot.
Chair, can I ask Joyce Ann just to explain a little bit further the 38 that she has referred to is different to what sits on TPK's website as 9 iwi authorities sitting under Hawke's Bay Regional Council's rohi, and I note in that list that Ngāti Tūwharetoa is not on the list on TPK's website. So is it fair to say that TPK's website is well out of date and doesn't reflect your understanding, or is there something else going on here?
I think, James, in respect to Puni Kōkiri, what they've got in their website talks about the iwi authority as the snapshot of the time. When you go into Kāhui Māngai, which is where the research took me, that's where the 38 popped up. And so correctly here, so for example, we have Ngāti Pāhauwera, and Ngāti Pāhauwera, they have their development trust in here. Now, Tūwharetoa, we see there they have got 6 in there, and there are different organisations. There's the Settlement Trust, Te Kotahitanga o Tūwharetoa, Tūwharetoa Māori Trust Board. So that's where it can. So you could be a treaty entity, and then within that, the business arms can apply as iwi authority.
Right.
So in essence, it is correct for the picture of it, but it's the Te Kāhui Māngai breaks it down to actually saying one iwi entity, you could have this. Also, what we do have is kahungungu, Ngāti Kahungungu, so we see that the tai whenua, all of the tai whenua in this region have iwi authority status as well. So I'm happy to get a copy of this too, if you'd like that, James, so we could hand it around for this meeting. Yep.
I know a little bit about Te Kāhui Māngai. So Section 35 of the RMA requires the government to keep a list of iwi authorities, which is Te Kāhui Māngai. It's their attempt to do that. It's pretty much self-selecting. So if you put your name forward, you get put on the list. That's how it works. There's no rigour around saying yes, no to who puts their name up effectively. It's an ongoing issue with the RMA and government and iwi and councils, and all councils struggle with who is the taking a whenua in our region. To define who that is, they generally they default to the government, and the government says, well, we don't really know. Go back to the council is sort of how it works. There's a circular problem going on. Te Kāhui Māngai is a list, but it's not a robust list of any rigour around yes, no, or sort of any questioning about whether they are the appropriate authority to be on there. So there's a couple of ways they get there. So Māori Fisheries Act, there's a list of iwi. There's about 57 or something, I think, under the Māori Fisheries Act. They're on there, plus others who have just sort of marae-based. There's a whole, like George said, 38. I don't think the council acknowledged 38 iwi authorities in the Hawke's Bay region. We need to be careful about balancing those two things out. Just don't take that as the gospel.
Chair, in light of Ricky's contribution and the issues raised by Joyce Ann, noting that we can't make any decisions today, would it be helpful if we brought a letter, a draft letter to the Minister in line with the representations from Northland and Bay of Plenty forward to the committee's next meeting for the committee's consideration. And the letter would be designed to seek clarity from the Minister about definitions and how we manage, I guess, the potentially rather messy and
I think if we stick to affected parties aspect, it would be a lot more practical. For example, recently we had a thing associated with a water conservation order, and we missed out a whole group of people who own all the land up the top because they're not part of an area authority. But many of them have got, like say, if you go up north, there's Ngai Takoto, they got 600 people. They're iwi authority. Some of those land blocks up in the top of the Moaka, they've got about 3,000 members. They, I think we can get a bit. I know that in the past it was convenient for the Crown to have these iwi groups or whatever, but in terms of resource management things, I think you've got to identify what is the area, who are the affected parties, and focus on that. Otherwise, you miss out on a whole lot of people.
Chair, could I just
respond to James on that? In it, whilst I think there's an initial attraction to the idea, one of the things that's coming through on this presentation, certainly the thing that I had in my head, was that this mana whakahono in many ways is delightfully ambiguous. It's been designed in a way to fit every circumstance you possibly could. Now, if you then go and try to put some rigour in it, some solid definitions, you might lose some of the advantages of ambiguity. And it seems that what's being proposed here is, given its ambiguity, if you would like to, we wish to initiate such an instrument and work through it, given the ambiguity, we can shape it in a way which suits our own personal our circumstances of our region and our council and the tangata whenua in our region. So I'm a bit cautious whether I want to know the answer first.
Well, certainly we'd bring a draft for consideration at the next meeting, but look, I was going to make the observation back to the officials that the thing that drives us to despair and distraction as a council more than anything is enabling legislation that is ambiguous as all hell, and we've got too much of it, and it causes us great grief. And more prescriptive legislation from my perspective would be helpful, and I understand the point you're making about the freedom to operate, if you like, but certainly this legislation gives rise to a large number of implementation questions, and I guess my concern is that it's operative today. We have to deal with the provisions today and deal with initiation of these agreements today, and I've got a lot of sympathy with where the co-chair is coming from, and we do have to consult and engage with affected parties under the RMA anyway, but we also now have this additional layer, and so we have to deal with it, really.
I get that, but I'm coming back to that. And the thing is that if we come to an agreement in this area about how it will be structured and be done, well then that will be strong and enduring because it will be what we have agreed to. Mm. If we have some definition written for us somewhere else, it will be someone else's formula. Mm. And that's what I'm getting from Toru, is let's see where it matters, who it matters, and write it for that. Mm. Affected party, who it matters, why it matters, and deal with it from that point up. So I think what Toru is telling me is we need a much wider conversation, circle around us till we come to where we feel we are comfortable with it, and then at that point move.
Mr. Chairman, just following on from those matters, in terms of practical implementation, hypothetically, if there's an approach from an iwi authority or a post-treaty settlement or a hapu under this policy, and multiple parties are affected, and again, hypothetically, if there's duplication or conflict between those parties that making application under this policy, how does the council go about resolving that, or does someone else resolve that?
The council resolves it. That's how I read that.
Sorry?
That's how I read this as council resolves it.
Well, we can seek to resolve it. Am I correct that on the list of 38 is Ngāti Pāro?
Yes, Ngāti Pāro, they have just been awarded iwi authority status within Ahuriri Hapu.
So to be clear, they, for the purposes of the Mana Ahuriri settlement, were part of that group and have effectively sought their own status, and therefore we get into this. It's a really good example of the challenge here, because they could initiate, and therefore we would need to enter into a set of arrangements that sit, including for planning, so explicitly in there, RMA planning. So they would be seeking to effectively join the RPC, not as a seat at this table, but to have a parallel set of arrangements about how the work of the RPC works alongside their participation inside planning. So it adds another layer of complexity for what we already have at this table in terms of representation and participation.
The RPC, though, is established by a separate act, isn't it? So
that's right.
So it would be the practice of council, actually, on how they manage other relationships outside of that act.
Yes.
Yes, Chan?
Joseph,
Can you speak up, please?
I just want to pick up on your comments about Ngāti Pāro and Mana Ahuriri being potentially recognised as different iwi authorities. I think we need to remember that an iwi authority is just an organisation, and it has its mandate from the underlying people. So from time to time we might find that iwi authorities, just like non-iwi authorities, lose their mandate or gain a mandate. So, and I just want to drill down on this, because I think it's really important that we understand that, as Toro pointed out, in terms of the treaty, we're talking about hapu, particularly in Kahungunu. And so when you drill down, you get to marae and hapu, you know who looks after a particular awa or what their area is, and it's those people who might give their mandate from time to different iwi authorities to represent them. So to me, it will depend on the issue at hand as to who the appropriate one is. And it's not always easy, but then it's, not easy in the non-Māori world either. So I just think we need to I think we all recognise we need to be cautious, but we also need to remember that when we're talking about the relationship of Māori with their taonga, it's not really the relationship of the iwi authority with their taonga. It's the hapu, marae and people that they represent. And when you've got these settlement groups, which were large, unnatural groups in some instances, you've got flowing on for that post-settlement entities where they were told they could only have one, and then you've got maps produced by TPK representing the area that was negotiated. Those are all, to some extent, artifices, because it was all in order to get a settlement. So I think we just need to take care with the information that we're relying on, and I certainly don't think the council has the skill set, background to determine who are tangata whenua. That will depend on situation by situation, having conversations. Just like it does in a resource consent hearing, or just like it does on a plan change when you've got different groups asserting kaitiakitanga. It comes down to the kōrero at the time and what taonga you're talking about. So I do think a lot of these constructs like iwi authority are there to suit someone else's purpose, not necessarily Māori. So we just need to take care with with who we're talking with and about what.
So, Tanya, can I ask you, do you think the mana whakahono provisions in the RMA are helping or further complicating that quest?
Well, look, really, I think they're born out of frustration of Māori not having good relationships with councils.
Yep, get that.
And really, you didn't need the mana whakahono to require the council to consult or have a relationship with their iwi partners or their hapu partners. So I think it's a construct to require councils to engage where they may not have in the past. But, you know, I expect that the council will have some good understanding of who's who on the ground in certain areas and some not very good understanding in relation to other areas. So do I think it helps or hinders? I think it's just a tool. It shouldn't get in the way of finding out more about who's on the ground and understanding their issues, and the council working with those hapu or marae about those issues. If you want to formalise it in a whakahono, you know, agreement, then so be it. But I think it's a job that the council already had.
Yeah, no, look, I agree with that, and so it's better implementation of the existing provisions in the RMA might have been an alternative solution to these new set of arrangements. But look, they are what they are, and we now need to implement them.
I think the other aspect to this as well is that there are areas where there are shared interests and shared responsibilities. So you may get 3 or 4 groups, like say the Mohaka River, there's probably about 6 or 7 interested parties or affected parties who have varying degrees of cultural association. So it's not just about identifying something that's exclusive, I suppose.
And just to say that totally acknowledge the kōrero, and that so the Ministry for the Environment with Te Puna Kōkiri, and I think it relates to Department of Internal Affairs and local government, you know, we kind of want to be proactive in this and supporting rather than just kind of, you know, making legislation and then letting councils and iwi kind of sort it out themselves. So for one of these reasons, we had the Taranaki Iwi Environmental Forum, and that was a chance for iwi, hapu, councils and ministers to be in the same room and to talk about some of these type of issues. But I wonder if Dan want to talk about that, what's coming up in the Hawke's Bay, because in terms of writing a letter or bringing these issues to the attention of ministers, this could be a good opportunity, I would say.
Hey, thanks, Robert. Kia ora, everyone. I'm Dan Shenton. I'm in the Manatau team, which is one of the teams in MFE that work on treaty settlement negotiations, Māori engagement issues, and also work closely with teams right across the ministry on climate, water, RM, and also starting to work with DOC and MB on cross-agency issues. So we span the whole breadth in the NR sector. And so one of the mechanisms or tools we're looking at to work with regions, and this is just a start of a 10, is a forum approach. So as Robert mentioned, we just had a forum 2 weeks ago in Taranaki, and we're looking to have another one in mid-July. And so we've met with most of the post-settlement groups end of last year, beginning of this year, to design the forum. Basically, I'll give you a bit of context, and then I'll get into what the purpose of it is and how the day will run and next steps. So in terms of context, forums largely were born out of the treaty settlement process and the MFE. We have, like other agencies, protocols, agreements, post-settlement that cover how, in this instance, how MFE will engage with settlement groups after. And so one of the clauses in that particular MFE agreement for a number of the post-settlement groups here in Hawke's Bay is the development and rollout of a biennial forum. So that clause is pretty vague. It's a 2 or 3 paragraphs, and it talks about developing an approach to discuss matters of mutual interest, and for ministers, if practicable, to attend and to meet with the groups. So with that in mind, being relatively vague, for the last probably 4 to 5 months, we've spent, Taranaki and Hawke's Bay designing an approach, working with the settlement groups and what that would look like. So that's what we've been doing. Where we're heading is having the meetings with ministers attending. So at this stage, we've got Minister Parker attending with Minister Sage and Minister Mahuta. So that would be a key chunk of the 2 days, 18, 19 July, which will be at East Pier Hotel. That will be, we're still designing how that would look, but with Taranaki, we run that with separate one-on-one meetings with each of the groups. We may look at doing things, given some of the feedback we're getting from Minister Mahuta. She's really keen to come along to some of the workshops and actually be there with all the groups and councils together. So we're looking at maybe potentially an open session, but we have to design that and work with you on what that would look like, but certainly would still have the one-on-one sessions. Another key part of it is, and I know with the RPC and the groups are already doing their own thinking about how groups could potentially work on issues collectively for region-wide issues. Designing a couple workshops to really drill down on what are some of the collective issues, not saying that there aren't particular issues for each settlement group, so what are the collective issues across the region? So we may have a couple of sessions on that. And for Taranaki, certainly issues around engagement with the councils and decision making come up quite strongly. So we also had sessions on that. One of the big things we heard from Hawke's Bay and Taranaki is that's cool. We like the idea of meeting together, but we want action. And so one of the big things we're looking at doing, and we're not saying that mana whakahono could be one of those things you do outside of the forum. We're looking at pulling together an action plan from the 2 days and what are the key priorities that pulled out of it, and then actually briefing the ministers and our senior leadership team around about September, October. So we'll pull together both of the forums, Taranaki and Hawke's Bay, and have a package to ministers to basically set out what next. And that kind of feeds into, you're probably aware of the work that Minister Davis is doing with the Crown Māori relationship with the roadshow that completed about a month ago. So that's going to feed into some of the work and some of the kōrero they're hearing. And to say local government issues is one of the top 3 things they're getting back. And DIA is also pulling together with Meka Whaitiri a piece of work which is still in the initial stages around how councils are delivering on some of their obligations. So it's a pretty new, exciting space to be in, and we're really keen to sort of get the forum going and look at the next steps. So it's a bit of an overview. And
I've got a question for you, Dan, just before we rock on. I don't know if you're aware. Don't know if you can hear me on this. I don't know if you're aware, but this meeting's been streamed live. So just for clarity, my understanding was that the first day of the 2-day forum was invitation only, or is that public?
Yeah. It'll be. We're mainly looking at getting the post-settlement groups, so invitation.
Cool. Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify that while we're on a public forum. Yeah.
Thank you, Abby. And so for that, and so both Liz and I have been working with the team here, and at this stage, again, because post-settlement, the treaty entities will have their rangatira, if you like. They've asked that the attendance be the chair, the deputy chair, the mayors, the deputy mayors, and the CEOs, and for those council staff that are involved. So be very clear, if you don't get an invitation as a councillor here, or that it's because the treaty entities wanting to keep it contained like they did in Taranaki, rather than an open forum.
Hold up.
That's the first day though.
Yeah, so we're still getting some feedback from the group, so it's still forming up. So looking at the first day to be with ministers, a potential open session with attendees, councillors, ministers, and then using the rest of the day for iwi, for the post-settlement groups to work out to do a bit of a brainstorm session on some of the issues they'd like to discuss. I mean, with councils, have councils along for an open session on the second day. And then that's with the idea of pulling together some of those actions that would then pull together for ministers.
So we could be invited for the second day?
You'll be there for both, the post-settlement groups will be there for both days.
If you're post-settlement, no, so only if you are the post-settlement groups.
Days.
Or both days, but it might be just your chair, your deputy chair, so it's not all for everyone there. And secondly, it's important to note that in the first day, while there are discussions and workshops going on, it is the opportunity for the post-settlement entities, the rangatira, to meet with the minister. So that's why it's been kept to the rangatira status, working through that way. So unless you're within your treaty entity, you are invited, that's how you will come through the door.
I think it's important that the RPC reps who articulate the environmental issues on behalf of their post-settlement groups are present at that meeting, I think.
So you go back and you...
The other issue for me is we are not going to progress any of this stuff unless we spend a comprehensive session on monitoring.
Okay.
You know, there's a thing about the golden rule: if it's not measured, it's not managed. And historically, our relationship has not been managed well by the Crown because it hasn't been monitored, and the key performance indicators of organisations such as this have not been established. And the other point I would like to raise is that New Zealand signed the UNDRIP declaration, and Article 18, 19 and 20 are very specific about obligations to Indigenous people, and in particular in regard to decision making. And so we have concerns within this organisation in terms of how we are not party to decisions, and we would like an improvement in that area.
Yeah. Good topic. Thanks, Toro. So the other thing I should mention, like Taranaki, we may, and again we'll have to get in touch with the groups, post-settlement groups, but bring along some presenters, potentially on the second day. So one could be Tina Pillow, who presented at a Taranaki forum on the work she undertook on the NPS freshwater. We also had Roku Mihinui from Te Arawa, who is doing some work with councils on freshwater monitoring. And then the third presenter we had was Brandy Hudson, who's the CEO of the Auckland Māori Statutory Board. And so her group has actually audited the Auckland Council a couple of years ago on their engagement with Māori, and they're also doing a bit of work at the national stage on how a mana whakahono, they've got some legal advice on how that could roll out in Auckland. So that will be a information sharing part, but there will also be the crunchy stuff that you're interested to talk to. So it's covering all aspects.
Kia ora. Just getting back to your kōrero, Claire, you discussed about consents, and it's the practical level of when you receive consent. So I've received about 10 in the last 2 weeks, and I'm sitting there looking at them, and even once you do translate it, it's kind of like, what's the next leg in the process? How do you cause effect to those consent changes? So I'm hoping there'll be some guidelines in that. In regards to the workshop, common things that hit my mind that hits this area is water bottling approval, non-notifiables, Rongakapo or Te Mata Peak, water augmentation off our rivers, and mana whenua have no notification or say-so, although I've seen it in a consent I received yesterday. So these are the very real day-to-day issues that we have to traverse, and there is no process or method. And we're developing it as we speak. So discussion on appropriate pathways to do that, and to even see within the consents how this gives effect to our regional plan. Actually, I can't see any of those things. So when you talk about action from the mana whakahonua, I would hope that the action is actually at the ground level. Because we've had enough action of discussions at the top level, and a point in case is the top level could clarify who's the right person to talk to, but the bottom, on the ground, whānau, hapu, iwi, and every ratepayer actually needs to understand how they can cause effect on consents that are notified or not notified. There are a lot that aren't notified, and the decisions on whether they're notified or not, and in particular with Te Mata Peak, which fresh on my mind, that's made in-house. And as Toro said, how do you monitor that? I'd be interested in the mana whakahonua and how it can advise and facilitate that process.
Kia ora, Jenny. So I was going to take us back to this slide about preparing for a mana whakahonua, and part of what both council and tangata whenua need to do is actually understand what is the value of mana whakahonua for them. So whilst council's obliged to engage on mana whakahonua if they receive an initiation, it's not that everybody is obliged to initiate. So in the this policy originated through two avenues. One was the next steps for freshwater discussion document, and that was where mana whakahonua came through. And then in the bill at that time, in the Resource Legislation Amendment Bill, there was the iwi participation arrangement. That iwi participation arrangement was actually council initiated, so there was going to be an obligation on council to initiate with every iwi authority in their area within a certain time frame. So that was actually swapped around to being iwi authority initiated, because we wanted to acknowledge that not everybody is going to get value out of mana whakahonua. And there are a lot of relationships around the country at the moment that are actually functioning well, and there's no need to actually undermine or upset those relationships. So if we think about what is the value of a mana whakahonua, a lot of that is going to be around, for the iwi authority or hapu or marae who are driving it up, is actually we're not being recognised, we're not being taken into account on resource consent decisions, we're not being consulted, our statutory acknowledgement wasn't taken into account on this resource consent decision. Our only avenue is judicial review. How much does that cost council, and how much does that actually cost the iwi authority? A lot. So when we think about resourcing, what are we actually trying to avoid in terms of costs by building our relationship? So if we've got a good relationship, instead of having to go to judicial review, we come to the table and we actually have a conversation. We say, you didn't take into account our statutory acknowledgement, or our iwi environmental management plan clearly states that we have a really close relationship with X, Y, and Z. Why is it that your council staff, consenting staff, didn't pick that up and get in touch with us as an affected party? Or actually, you know, council invests in engineers, they invest in scientists, they have heritage planners, and those people comment internally on resource consents to assist with the notification decision. Why is it that this sector group of our community, tangata whenua, their perspectives aren't actually feeding in internally in council into those decisions? So the value of a mana whakahonua could be that you get to sit at the table and have the conversation about some of the council processes, some of the values, the tools that are available already to council, like environmental management plans, and actually how comfortable are the authors of those documents to have council pick them up, do an assessment on a resource consent, and summarise what they think are going to be the issues for tangata whenua before it gets sent to tangata whenua. Or, I don't know, there are a lot of opportunities, and it's really about thinking what are the issues and what's the best way to address those issues. So if a council is lacking in provision of Māori policy advice, so if we have a look at the the local bodies in Hawke's Bay and the Māori advice and policy departments of those that should feed in across all of those departments. If they lack that capacity and capability, then it's even more questionable on the decision making of that. So mana whakahono could help facilitate growing that capacity.
Yeah, totally.
Growing that capacity within, because it's all about the policy decisions and processes, isn't it? Yeah. So part of it, part of the purpose of the mana whakahono is to assist councils in fulfilling their statutory obligations under Section 6E, 7 and 8, which is the ones that you referred to earlier in terms of relationships with Waihi Tapu, Waihi Taonga, Kaitiakitanga and the treaty. I think there's quite a interesting example, if you'll bear with me, I know we're a little bit past morning tea, with Ngāi Tahu have set up some processes with with Christchurch City Council and the Regional Council, Selwyn Council and Waimakariri. So whilst Ngāi Tahu or Te Runanga or Ngāi Tahu recognise the mana of Ngā Hapu, they see value in actually coming together collectively under that iwi authority banner to engage with council. So that's to achieve some of those efficiencies, but it's also to assist them in linking into the other sections of the RMA that reference iwi authorities. So if you have a mana whakahono that comes through from a hapu, it doesn't as strongly link into all of the other sections of the Act. So they're looking to initiate as the iwi authority. 6 of the runanga have come together collectively and set up a consultancy, and that consultancy engages directly with the councils to respond to resource consents, to plan changes and also Local Government Act matters, so it's not limited to the RMA. The councils assist in funding that organisation and recognising that they have a statutory obligation to consult. A little bit after that consultancy was set up, they saw that there was actually a lack of information, and picking up on your monitoring point, council wasn't monitoring the flow of requests to Ngāi Tahu, so they set up a portal where council monitors all of the requests and pressures that they're putting on this consultancy, and that enables the parties to actually have a conversation about resourcing. It also enables them to prioritise the workflow, so instead of 5 different departments and councils sending through their own individual thing with a deadline of all the same day, council does some reflection on actually what is a priority and what are the realistic timeframes for the consultancy to respond. So it's really enabled a transparent conversation and recognition of the workflow and workload between the two.
So thank you. That's been a great background in terms of what we've got to look forward to next month. I'd like to thank you for coming, and we do have some, because of our funeral later this afternoon, we've got some pressing stuff we've got to carry on with, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And we can have a cup of tea now, and if you want a more informal discussion, please do so. Try and get back here within 7 minutes. Is that enough?
How much?
Yeah, 7 minutes.
All right, we've got a quorum now.
Mine goes at least 10.
Oh,
Good
come
job,
on.
15.
Forget the union stuff here.